Good.
Good evening. I am Peter Pingator. I'm the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. This is our annual public hearing for Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. It is noticed pursuant to public notice that was published in our newspapers and also noticed by posting with the clerk's office. This public hearing, like our last two, is being done by a hybrid format. For those of you who are listening at home, you can listen and attend virtually via Zoom, and the Zoom address is available on the notice in the agenda that's been posted with the clerk's office. As I said, it's a virtual and hybrid format, and this is done pursuant to former Governor Baker's emergency order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, which is GL 30A, Section 20, which is issued in March of 2020, and it's extended until March 31st of 2022. And the order allows public bodies to meet virtually and not be in violation of the open meeting law. As I said, we're meeting, it's a hybrid meeting. Zoom app is the way to participate if you're listening at home and not here presently. We have about most of our committee members are here in person, as well as a number of individuals who are here attending in person. And I think that we have people attending virtually as well. So let me begin by perhaps we can post the agenda. That's possible. And you can see that we have a number of applications and requests for grants that we will be discussing. And we also have some financial warrant articles that we also will be discussing. It's a public hearing, as I mentioned. Most of you are familiar with the CPC and the process involved in funding CPC applications, but allow me to summarize for those of you who are not familiar and for a reminder, if you will. The Community Preservation Act is a funding mechanism for participating towns to award grants to applicants to support affordable or community housing, preservation or restoration of historic resources, acquisition and preservation of open space, and restoration and investment in recreational resources. CPA funds are generated from a property tax surcharge in Needham of 2%. And the state provides what we call a matching fund. It's not actually a dollar for dollar match, but it's based on revenue generated from registry recording fees and oftentimes by a supplemental finance provided through the general court. Each year at town meeting, CPC funds are appropriated based on recommendations made by this committee to town meeting. CPC votes on whether to recommend funding for the application to the town meeting, and town meeting then votes on whether to accept or reject the recommendation for funding. Prior to our vote as a committee on whether to recommend funding, the CPC assigns liaisons, which are members of our committee, to work with the applicant. The CPC conducts due diligence on the request for funding. It's a series of questions and requests for documents, and there are usually follow-up questions and follow-up requests for documents. The CPC consults with the select board. The CPC consults with the finance committee, and the CPC seeks input from the public on applications. And that is what we're doing here tonight. And this is an opportunity for the public to provide to this committee input on each application for funding. Tonight, there are a total of 3 CPC applications for funding, as well as likely requests, because we haven't voted on it, but likely requests that will come before town meeting from the CPC to double the funding of the Community Housing Reserve Fund, with the goal of having 20% of CPC receipts appropriated to the Community Housing Reserve, rather than the statutory requirement of 10%. So we have 3 applications for funding and also financial warrant articles to discuss. This year, we have an additional item for our public hearing. We have proposed amendments to our CPA plan. The committee has been working on this document over the past 2 funding cycles, and we will be presenting the proposed amended plan to you for public comment this evening. Finally, I want to note that we have a separate section on tonight's agenda for community input, where we specifically ask the members of the public for their needs and desires and what they want to use CPA funds for. So you can provide your suggestions here tonight during the comments section when we get to it, or if you would prefer to reflect on this information a bit and email us, you can email your CPC through our staff, Cecilia Simchak. So here's how we're going to proceed. With respect to each application, a CPC member, who is one of the liaisons for the application, will introduce the application. A representative of the applicant will make a short presentation tonight. We only have 3, so we're going to have maybe 7 to 10 minutes for presentations. And with respect to each application, we will have public comments and questions. Here is how we will proceed with respect to public comments and questions. All speakers should state their name and address for the record. Please address your remarks to me, the chair. No back and forth in the room, no cross-talking. So that everyone will have an opportunity to speak, please limit your remarks. I always say for 2 to 3 minutes. We have a number of applications for discussion, and some of them are pretty complex. So try to be concise in your remarks. The more time you take, the less time you leave for another members of the public to provide input. With that in mind, you can speak once on an application, and if you wish to speak again, we will return to you only after everyone else has had an opportunity to speak. New information and your personal knowledge and observations are particularly helpful to the committee. It's not necessary, to repeat what's already been said, but it's perfectly acceptable to say, I agree with Mr. So-and-so or the previous speaker, and I don't consider that a waste of time. I think it's effective, and it's your way of petitioning the government, which is a valued principle of our representative democracy. We sometimes receive email communications from community members regarding pending applications for funding. The staff distributes those emails to the committee. This is another way, and it's an effective way of communicating your opinions to the committee. We read them. Sometimes people ask questions in their remarks. Direct your questions to me, the chair. In general, we won't answer the questions at that moment. We'll keep a note of them, and at the end of the presentations and comments regarding that particular application, the staff or someone else will respond to the questions that have been asked so that everyone has had a chance to speak. So those are the rules of the road. You probably noticed that they're very similar to the way we conduct business before town meeting. Turning to our agenda, I'm going to make one change in the order for a number of reasons. I'm going to ask Rick Zambone, who's a member of our committee, to make the presentation regarding what we call the financial warrant articles, and that is the allocation and appropriation of funds each year between the 3 required reserve accounts and the general account, and also a discussion about the issue of doubling the amount of funds appropriated to the reserve fund for community housing. So we'll start with Rick first, and then we'll move on to the first application, which is FY 2024-01, and that's the Housing Authority's application for Linden Chambers redevelopment. But first, let's go through the financial articles. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief. It is necessary to do a roll call. I was working with 2 different scripts, and I'm glad that you reminded me of that. And it's also our opportunity to do a tech check. So let me start with a roll call. Joe Barnes. He's absent. Bob Dermody.
Here.
Laura Dorfman.
Here.
Reg Foster.
Here.
Dina Hannigan. Dave Herrer.
Here.
Gene McKnight,
Here.
Rick Zimbo.
Here.
Okay. And the chair, I am present. Okay, thank you once again, Gene. Okay, so now let's move on to our first matter for discussion, and that is FY 2024 CPC increase in funding of community housing restricted funds from 11% to 22%. Rick Zimbo will be our presenter. Thank you.
Yeah, Peter, thank you. Cecilia, am I good to share my screen?
Give me 1 second. No, that's the wrong one. You should be good now.
Okay, let's see how it works here. Okay. Okay. Everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. As Peter indicated, this is kind of a summary of 2 articles that are appearing in the town's warrant. This takes place every year. It's part of our responsibility to look at the funding that we receive and allocate it across a number of funds. So these are preliminary numbers, but for the purposes of this meeting, it gives you an idea as approximately where we are, and that's why they're categorized as estimated. But Peter talked about property tax surcharge receipts, and that's 2%. It's equal to, this year, for fiscal year 2024, $3,212,000. In addition, there was a match, obviously not 1-for-1, but there's a match that comes out of the state's CPA trust fund. And this year, for fiscal year 2024, that's $1,131,787. That totals to a $4,344,000 approximately funds for community preservation projects and reserves. Coming into fiscal year 2024, we have a number of reserve accounts, community housing, historic reserves, open space, and then something called general reserve, which covers most of the balance of whatever funds are remaining for distribution and assignment to various projects or to reserve funds. CPA free cash is just a collection of all of the monies either turned back as a result of previous projects that weren't spent, general reserve money that wasn't allocated from the prior year, and any administrative costs that the committee might have had that they did not spend in the prior year. So those are the current balances entering into February of this year as we look to allocate the funds. Now, as Peter talked, the way the approval process works is historically applications are processed annually as they're received. So in the fall, applicants can go online, get applications for funds, and indicate their intent to file for CPA funds for that coming year. As Peter indicated, the projects are reviewed first to determine eligibility for CPA funding. There's a criteria that's used. Sometimes people apply for funds and they're not quite eligible for CPA funding, so they'd have to go to another source to fund their projects. Then, as indicated, we go through a due diligence process. We assign liaisons, and we analyze each project to determine not only for the funding for this project, but also whatever funding is needed as we move forward. A lot of times people come in looking initially for design funds, and then they shift, and in the next year or the following years, they look for funds for construction. You'll see some of that take place this year. And one of the aspects of what we do is we also take a look at 3 to 5 years out, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But we typically vote to either partially or fully fund a project, and we recommend that to town meeting. Or we may recommend, for a number of reasons, that the project not move forward at that particular time, or as a result of not having sufficient information to move forward. Moving forward beyond just the initial year, we also take a look at planning for the future. What else is out there by way of request over the next 3 to 5 years? And we gather a lot of that from the town's 5-year capital plan for projects that are either identified with money defined to the projects or estimates defined to the projects, or projects that are out there that are identified, anticipated, but they don't necessarily have a dollar fund associated with them or dollar amount associated with them. And we do that as we look out 3 to 5 years to see where we are with respect to the timing and the amount of the money that's available to fund some of these projects. And in looking at this year, as it has been in the last couple of years, the current financial modeling indicates that we have more funding needs going out in time than resources available. So just so that people understand that, while you may ask to fund a particular project, it doesn't necessarily mean that it can be funded to the full amount, or for that matter at all. And it all depends a lot on the priorities. And we take a look at that very closely, and we try and identify those priorities, and we earmark the funds for anticipated needs as we go out through time. So the next slide talks about the funding allocations. And as I indicated before, you have the beginning balances in the reserve fund category. Here is community housing. Whoops. All right, now I have a problem. How do you move a slide presentation backwards?
The back arrow, the left arrow.
Thank you. So in this particular case, you have community housing, open space, and historic resources. Those are the current reserve funds. Recreation can come under, depending on what it's like, either under the open space or under the GPA general reserve. An example of recreation space that's under the GPA general reserve is Rosemary Pool. It's a good example of one that's been categorized that way in the past. And what we do is we allocate, and we're required to allocate 10% of the available reserves into the 3 reserve buckets: community housing, open space, and historic resources. And what we try and do is each year we try and allocate 11% to make sure that by the end of the year, if we had some reason that we drew down more than we should, or we didn't have sufficient funds put aside, then we always base it on 11%. So if you take a look, the open space has $477,817 currently allocated for that reserve account going forward next year. As Peter indicated, we're discussing and we'll be considering doubling the community housing reserve amount, which is in essence twice the amount of open space. We've done that the last 2 years because in our look ahead to the 3 to 5 year capital plan, we noticed that there's a significant number of requests that will be appearing for community preservation housing, community housing. And as a result, what we tried to do is we look for ways to increase that. In the last 2 years, we brought forward the idea to town meeting that we double the amount assigned to those reserve funds, and town meeting agreed with the assessment. We most likely are going to do it again this year, but we haven't taken a vote on that. The third category down is historical resources, and there's $0 reserved there. And the reason why that's there is because historic resources, the funding or the reserve money for that has been taken up with debt service that's payable for the town hall and the beginnings of the Emery Grover project. And those two debt service amounts cover the full amount that we have to reserve for historic resources. So there is no additional money being allocated to historic resources. It's being covered by the debt service for the town hall and Emery Grover. And then finally, we have the CPA General Reserve. And in essence, that's the balance of the reserve or the funds available. But we deduct from that any administrative costs that we have. This year, we'll be looking for $82,000 in administrative costs. Also, it would cover any debt service that's required, for example, in this case, for Rosemary Pool. And that equates to the balance of the reserve funds that are under consideration. Now, one thing, this is an estimate. I gave you the resultant account balances on the right. However, this doesn't take into account any actions that we take on the projects currently pending before us, the applications currently pending before us. So those funds, we have to make a decision not only on the amount, but from what buckets they may be drawn from. And so that's why this is a preliminary set of numbers. And as we approach town meeting, the numbers will be much firmer and we'll have a better handle on where we go from a financial perspective. And then finally, the last slide is the other aspect of a town meeting article that we have in front of us. And I'm just going to briefly go through this, but during fiscal years 22 and 23, the town received additional state matching funds after the fact. And as a result, the appropriations to the reserve categories were insufficient to satisfy the 10% requirement per reserve fund. So in order to meet that 10% requirement, and it's a legal requirement, we have to achieve that. We will be recommending at town meeting a transfer of $134,000 or approximately $135,000 from the general reserve fund, $33,000 of which, or $34,000 will be going to the historic reserve, $34,000 will be going to open space. And similarly, to keep the community housing reserve ahead of the game, we will probably be recommending that we double the amount that goes into the community housing reserve, even though we're not required to do it. But we think it's a prudent expenditure at this point in time. So with that, that kind of ends the presentation. And any other questions?
Okay, well, all right, thanks, Rick. All right, so first, let me start with, well, thank you. Let me start with folks here in the room. If any of you have any comments or questions, let me know, state your name, we go from there. Okay, anyone who's listening, any of our listening community members, questions? Okay. All right. Well, then that will end our discussion regarding the financial warrant articles that you'll see at our town meeting warrant. Rick, the lack of questions is proof that you explained that with particular clarity. Thank you very much.
Either that or I talked over everybody's head, Peter, and nobody understood. One or the other. Okay.
All right. Thank you again. All right. So now let's move on to our applicants' requests for funding. And we will start with FY 2024-01, and that is the request by the Needham Housing Authority Needham Housing Authority with respect to the Linden Chambers redevelopment. Our liaisons assigned to this request are Laura Dorfman, Bob Dermody, and Rick Zimbone. It's one of whom will what we'll do is to make a brief summary statement describe the project, and then we'll turn it over to a representative of the applicant. I believe tonight the presenter will be Reg Foster, who pulls kind of double duty as chair of the Needham Housing Authority Board, and was also a member of our committee. But when he's speaking tonight as a presenter, he's wearing the hat of chair of the Needham Housing Authority Board. Okay, so let's start with our liaison introduction.
Quick question for Cecilia. Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Do I have to use the microphone, or can I just speak naturally?
I think it's picking, if you have it angled towards you, it'll help, but.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming, and welcome to our guests online. My name is Bob Dermody, one of the liaisons that the chair mentioned. I'll provide a brief introduction of the project. A key objective of the NHA Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative is the redevelopment of the Linden Street and Chambers Street properties that currently provide 152 deeply affordable studios for elderly disabled households. During 2023, an architectural engineering firm, Bargman, Henry, and Archetype, will be completing the schematic design for the overall redevelopment and securing zoning and other approvals. BH+A, as they're known, services are being partially funded by a Needham fiscal year 23 CPA funding award of $1 million. This project will be done in phases to accommodate temporary resident relocation. The architectural engineer team will prepare documents and provide administration services for construction phase 1, currently envisioned to be either one of two options. A smaller 62-unit project where 28 units at Linden are demolished and replaced and 32 new affordable units are added at a total of $37.4 million. The second option is a larger 128-unit project where all 72 Linden Street units are demolished and replaced, and 56 new affordable units are added for a total cost of $70 million. In calendar year of 23, NHA must also secure financing commitments for a construction phase 1 redevelopment project, currently estimated to cost $37.4 million. Working with the Cambridge Housing Authority as consultants, NHA has developed a conceptual pro forma financing plan, which includes the use of 4% low-income housing tax credits, a mortgage, additional CPA funding, and additional state funding, such as grants and soft loans. This conceptual financing plan must be turned into reality during calendar year 2023 via applications submitted to the DHCD and other agencies. This application requests $1,165,000 of fiscal year 24 CPA funding for services needed for the following. 1, complete the remaining Linden Chambers pre-development activities, construction document preparation and administration and other tasks leading up to the start of actual construction on phase 1. The updated pre-development budget for these activities is $2.6 million. Number 2, develop and secure the financing of construction phase 1. Number 3, demonstrate Town of Needham support, financial and otherwise, to incentivize the award of the state funding necessary to complete construction phase 1. And now I just want to share with everyone listening several issues that the Community Preservation Committee has discussed with the proponent and continues to research as part of our due diligence in reviewing this project. These include things such as the timeline for the project and timeline of each phase. The scope of the project is mentioned up above, what will be the ultimate number of units built, sources of financing for the project, total CPA requests for the life of the project, zoning issues that are required or need to be looked at, project oversight capabilities of the Needham Housing Authority, our board, and the town all together, and comparative costs of projects in other local communities. That concludes my introduction, Mr. Chair.
I'm wondering if, just for the listening public, if you, just to make it clear that 1.0 million was estimated for Barkman in the application in FY 2023.
Correct.
But there were other expenditures, and the request, I don't think we ever said that on the at least right now, is that the request was, we loosely referred to it as $1.4 million. It was 1.386 million. That was in FY 2023. Because if you're busy at home doing your math, that's how you come up with a total of $2.6 million.
That is correct.
Okay, good. All right, thank you, Bob. All right, so now let's hear from our presenter, Reg Foster.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Bob, for an excellent summary. I'm going to try to adapt my presentation that I have, which, Cecilia, are you going to put that up on the screen? I'm going to try to not repeat the points that Bob so ably repeated. And while that gets up on the screen, I just want to thank our liaisons, Rick Zimbone, Laura Dorfman, for their support through this process, and the rest of the CPC as well. And also, I believe in the room is our interim executive director. Is that right? Steve Merritt, available for any questions as necessary. And in the attendees, we have Margaret Moran. I think was there. No, she's now been promoted. Again, available for any questions the chair may deem to put to us here. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And just briefly, I think almost everybody knows who and what the Needham Housing Authority is. We strive, we do two major things. We strive to be an excellent landlord for the 336 units that we already have and operate. Our other part of our mission is why we're here tonight, which is to preserve and create new affordable housing. We were formed at town meeting on May 7th, 1948. It's our 75th birthday coming up in a month or two here. We just thought that was an interesting coincidence here. We also have 123 Section 8 vouchers, which are made available to individuals so that they can go find rental housing in the private market. Next slide, please. So what is the Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative? It started in 2019 with the completion of the facilities master plan. We spent a couple of years, 3 years doing that, and then outlined a blueprint and a strategy for either completely renovating or tearing down and redeveloping all of our 336 units. And it divided this 5 to 10 year program into 5 discrete projects or portions. And this application tonight, it's listed there. People could take a look at what it is. This application has to do with the redevelopment of the 152 units at Linden and Chambers Street. And we'll be talking about number 2 and number 3 when we get to the next application on the agenda here. Next slide, please. Now, why is Linden and Chambers Street developments, the 152 units, why is that our number one priority? And for those of you who are listening who don't know where it is, it's on Linden Street, right across from the High Rock School, the 6th grade center. Basically, these units are completely worn out. They were built in the 50s and early 60s. They are also very small, very substandard by today's metrics here. They're 400 square feet studio apartments, think of a room 20 by 20, in which you have everything, your kitchen, your bathroom, living room, your dining room, and your sleeping quarters. All these units are deeply affordable, meaning that nobody who rents them pays more than 30% of their annual income for rent, no matter how little that is. And besides the issues I've noted, they are really in pretty poor shape in terms of lack of accessibility. And of course, they were built in another era where the concept of net zero buildings and the climate issues that we face today are, just did not exist back then. And that diagram on the right there is showing what the layout is right now. There's a lot more information on the website if people are interested. Next slide, please. And this is just some pictures of Linden Street, the cramped quarters. There's poor access from the outside, all the access is from the outside, paving issues, inefficient land use. All the kitchens are original with their original finishes that are sort of worn out, and the building envelopes are not in good shape. Next slide. And these are pictures of Chambers Street, same sort of problems. These are two-story brick buildings. We could, do more density there. They're the undersized living spaces. The laundries for each building are on the second floor. So if you're a disabled or an aging tenant on the first floor, it's hard to clamber up the stairs to do your laundry. Paving issues, and most importantly, there are no elevators. Next slide, please. So what are the sort of first things we're doing with the redevelopment project here? And I note there's a typo, should say November 2022, that didn't get corrected. But we put out an RFP to hire the architect engineering firm that Bob referred to, BH&A. We had the project kickoff in early January 2023. And right now we're in the middle of the beginning of design stage number one. And as Bob said, that was funded, this is being funded by last year's CPA grant award. Let's go to the next stage here. On the right of that slide, you'll see a 2014 concept of how the site might be redeveloped. That's not currently operative, but just to give a sense of what could be put there. Next slide, please. Bob referred to our current thinking that there's sort of two scenarios that a phase one of construction could be done. The reason there is a phase one of construction is it's too much to take on to do the whole 152 unit site, whole 8 acres in one big project, too disruptive, not enough money, et cetera. And so we're looking at sort of two alternatives on the left there with the orange square. That's sort of the north side of the Linden Street property. We're thinking, there's a project that could be done where those 8 buildings that have 32 units in it could be, 28 units could be expanded into 62 units, 1-bedroom units. And these would be going from studios to 650 square foot 1-bedrooms. Or there's maybe a larger project that could be done if funding can be found, where 72 studios are going to 128 1-bedrooms. And I think that should be 32. That's another typo, 32 studios there. Move to the next slide. So this slide shows the project schedule for the next 6 months. This is the first part of the design phase, and is in essence what is being funded by the CPA grant that we got last year. It covers this conceptual design and the schematic design, and takes the project through the point of determining what those zoning changes are and being able to go to, we'll be working to go to the planning board, other town boards to determine how to get those zoning changes done. Next slide, please. This is the, right now, the overall project schedule from where we are starting in January 2023. And envisions, I'm not going to go through every detail of this, but if you look at the star down towards the bottom there with the long blue construction phase there, you know, it envisions in the fourth quarter sometime being able to start construction for whichever one of the scenarios, phase one construction scenarios, makes the cut and can be done. Next slide, please. So this the question is sort of what do these two scenarios cost to develop, and where does the funding come from? And there's a lot more detail that the CPC has been reviewing, as Bob referred to. And but just at a high level, the 62 unit project is, you know, estimated to be sort of in the $38 million construction range. And the 128 unit project is approximately 70 million. The sources of funding that we're envisioning at a sort of pro forma modeling basis is shown below that. And the important lines are, first of all, the one that says Needham CPA funding, that's got an orange bar around it. It looks like we've all in, and this is more than just pre-development. This is all funding. You know, we might need as much as $5 million for the smaller project, and we're projecting maybe $6.4 million for the larger project. And the other important thing to highlight on this chart for tonight's presentation is the green box at the bottom. It shows the leverage, approximately $707.50 of outside money being brought in for every dollar of CPA funding from Needham, or as much as, you know, $11 for every dollar for the larger projects, should that become feasible. Next slide, please. So here's another slide. I'm not going to go into detail. Excuse me a second. And that is the sort of what are the monies going to be used for in this fiscal year 2024 request, and how does that compare with what the fiscal year 2023 request is? That's in the columns number 1 and 2. And the CPC is looking very closely at what's the reason for this additional funding, what's changed, and some of it's because of increased costs, some of it's because of additional scope, and some of it's for both reasons. Next slide, please. So another way of looking at this is that the last year's request took us up to the middle of where that red line, vertical line is, dotted line, approximately, or maybe towards the end of that, approximately, whereas the fiscal year 2024 request that we have before the CPC and before us tonight takes us the rest of that period of time. And then, as Bob pointed out, it seems like he knows this better than I do, putting these red lines in. It actually, there's a second phase that would go beyond where that rightmost phase is, that would cover some of the cover the costs of construction administration during the construction phase. On next slide, please. So this is just another way of looking at what we have been and project we will be, we have been, we are, and project we will be requesting from Needham to support this project. And number 1 is what we requested for last year, approximately 1.4 million. And number 2 is what we're requesting this year, approximately 1.2 million, to complete out the design phase and everything that we're going to be paying to BH&A through the fixed price contract that we have in place with them. And then we're looking right now in our crystal ball and projecting that we may need as much as another 2.5 to 3.9 million for either the smaller project or the larger project in construction funding in order to make the numbers work. So last slide here, I believe. What is the bottom line? What are the benefits to the town of Needham? Well, number one, it's the top town priority. It was top priority in the 2007 Affordable Housing Plan, and here we are in 2023. And the December 2022 housing plan that was just completed and approved by the select board and the planning board in January, it's also a top priority there. It's needed because our current housing is obsolete and worn out and needs to be replaced unit for unit, from these small studios to these one-bedroom units to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing to the people who use these units as their homes here in Needham. And then it also provides us an opportunity to build additional affordable housing units that are needed. The benefits obviously to us and to the community is the CPA funding is a catalyst and the key to making the project work. It's a small part of it, but it's a very essential part of it. It'll produce one of these two projects as we envision it right now, 128 unit project or 62 unit project. Notable that all of these units will be affordable housing, not market rate housing as we envision it right now. And the leverage factor that I've already mentioned three times. So that's the end of the presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Just for points of clarification, and I'm drawing now a little bit from my memory, from my reading, and in part something that I'm reading in front of me, is that in terms of the total cost, these are estimates that you're talking about in terms of the total costs, and the sources of funds too are not actual, they're not promised funds. They're, again, these are aspirational numbers, even from DHCD and other sources, including CPA. I just want the listening public to understand that it's not like these funds are sitting in a queue waiting to be appropriated for this particular project, correct?
That's correct.
Right. I just want to point that out. So I don't want the listening public to misunderstand that. And you heard Rick Zambone talk a little bit about our finances. And in fact, the Housing Authority always, in response to due diligence questions, has always said that they understand that CPA funding at this level may not be available or possible given other town priorities or given the CPA receipts in a particular year. So just with that caveat in mind, keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers on the page, okay? And thank you, Rich, by the way. Thank you very much for a good presentation. All right, so now why don't we start with our members of the public who are here with us tonight. If you have any comments or questions, okay? You have to state your name and address for the record. Welcome, Ms. Kirk.
At Reggie's suggestion, I reached out to residents over the last few days just to see what their reaction is to this huge project and how they look upon it. So we had a St. Patrick's Day party on Sunday, and every single resident who was there signed this petition.
So do you want to,
I'll read it.
Why don't you read the petition and then we'll have that, okay? This is great.
I am a resident of Needham Housing and am very much in favor of the authority making substantial improvements, upgrades, and changes to the buildings in the various neighborhoods. I hope that the Community Preservation Committee will respond enthusiastically.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. Do you want to give us an estimate about how many people signed?
Well, there are 19.
That's a lot.
And the top bunch were their own signatures, but the weather being what it's been the last few days, I made phone calls, and with their permission, I added these other names. And
We'll take you at your word. We're going to take you at your word. Okay.
And these are very, very enthusiastic. But I should also say, I got 4 people saying they really didn't want to ever have to move again. So that's a concern we have to really address.
Okay, good. Thank you for adding that too. Thank you very much for the
Yeah.
petition.
Okay.
And also, again, folks who live in the neighborhood didn't get a chance to sign the petition and they want to, they can send an email saying, I wish that I were there at that St. Patrick's Day party and I would have signed. Okay, all right, that's great. That's part of our record.
Mr. Chair, I have a question about the petition. May I ask the question?
Okay, we'll let you, okay.
Yeah, when it said the developments, is this focused only on Linden Chambers or on the other developments as well?
Most of the people who were at the party were from Linden Chambers,
Okay, thank you.
but the others, I went all over the place to get all the other neighborhoods represented.
So I want to just note, Jean, that the petition says the buildings in the various neighborhoods. Okay, so this extends everywhere. Okay.
Thank you for
All right,
clarifying.
thank you again, Ms. Kirk. I appreciate that. All right, any other comments? Yes, you'll have to state your name.
I'm Steve Merritt. I'm the interim executive director for the Needham Housing Authority. I've been around a few years, former commissioner of the Housing Authority back in the 80s. And I just wanted to reiterate what Commissioner Kirk had said about the popularity among our residents of the improvements and the redevelopment.
I just want to make sure we can hear. Can we, how are we doing? Can we hear, can everybody hear? Okay, you know what? Here's what we're going to do.
Give me a second.
Either speak up or we can move a microphone.
No,
Yeah.
okay.
What's that?
So I'm Steve Merritt, I'm the interim director. I've been with the authority almost a year, and we have held a number of meetings at Linden Chambers in particular about this project, and have had actually one with the architects there. I just wanted to reiterate what Commissioner Kirk said. It's very popular among the residents. They are all concerned though about moving, and I know that was, when we look at the two choices, the smaller or the larger, the smaller one really makes more sense for the continuity of our residents to be able to stay in Needham as much as we can. Anytime a project like this is done, there's a relocation plan created, and I know I've worked with Cambridge before in those plans, and that'll be starting in the works as we move a little bit further along. So that is a very real concern and of our residents. But the buildings have been around for a long time. They are low standard in size, in amenities, certainly in carbon footprint, and they're expensive to run. But more importantly, there are very few that are handicap accessible at all. Never mind, there are none up to code. And some people have disabilities that they make do, but it's really not, as I say, up to code or something that needs to be filled. We have a good size waiting list. We never have a lack of people waiting. And as someone who grew up in this town and have known people who lived there since I was a knee-high to a grasshopper, I really want to commend not only the Housing Authority and Reg for bringing this forward, but also the town for making it a priority. And I want to thank your committee because I served for a number of years at the Norwood Housing Authority, and they got late to the game on the CPA. I know how much work goes into it, setting it up and all, and I just want to say I appreciate that and look forward to working with you more in the future. But thank you for your consideration.
Thanks very much. Okay. Any other comments by our community members who are here tonight? Okay. All right. So now let's do this. Let's go to our listening public and see let's go to our first one. Cecilia, we'll let you handle the list.
Yep.
All right. The rules apply. When you get called on, you have to state your name and where you live, even if I know who you are and everyone else in the room knows who you are. I've had select board members call in, they still have to state their name and where they live, okay?
Okay, I'm allowed to talk for Rachel.
Hello?
Hi, yes, we
Hello?
can.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I have 3 points, please, very quickly. I agree with the petition that Penny referred to. And Penny, you can add my name to that. Oh, I'm sorry, my name is Rachel Kremlisk. Did you want my address?
That was one of the things that I asked for.
Okay, I live at 22 Seabeds Way, number 7.
Thank you, Ms. Grimshaw.
Kremlisk, but that's okay.
I'm sorry. It's printed in front of me. I should have been paying attention.
Excellent. And are you the Peter that,
I am that, Peter.
Okay.
Yes. Peter Pingatore is my name.
okay,
I live
thank
at
you, Peter.
146 Hillcrest Road.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. I love that hill. I walk up it in the summertime for my cardio.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So you might see me walking up. Say hi next time. And then, okay, so actually there's 4. That was the first one. And then my second one is I strongly believe that the larger project should be picked. And the major reason for that is financial, because you get more bang for the buck. Just wanted to put my 2 cents in for that. Third is the third and fourth are kind of connected, so are definitely connected. So I heard someone say that I heard Penny speak of some residents really don't want to move, and I truly understand that concept. And I feel for everyone who's hasn't wanted to and still had to, and I being one of those. So what I suggest is that when we get to that point, that we come together as a community and find other residents that are willing to help pack up, because maybe someone is not capable due to their disability or whatever, that we find a group of members that are willing to help pack up and move these wonderful residents that are part of our community. So those are my comments. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kremlis. And I look forward to seeing you on Birds Hill. Okay,
Excellent.
let's go on to our next community member.
Paula Dickerman.
Hi, I'm Paula Dickerman. I live at 20 Burnside Road. I'm a resident of Needham, and first thing I want to say is I really appreciate the due diligence that Mr. Darmody talked about, that there are so many issues to look at in this project and its financial viability. So thank you for doing all of that work. At a higher, less detailed level, I'm completely behind this project. I think that the town owes it to the project, owes it to the residents. The town should be providing quality housing for all of its residents. This is something that is funded by the state and the federal government mostly. CPC funds have been used very gingerly in the past, is my understanding, because you haven't been asked, but the point is that those funds have not been used to support the housing until recently. If you look at 20% of our allocation, that's $800,000 or $900,000 a year. We're being asked for a little bit more than that, right? It's maybe 6-point-something million over 5 years. It's there, we have the money. I think it would be shameful for us to not support this opportunity as strongly as we possibly can. We don't have an affordable housing trust, so we do, but it's not well funded enough to support a project like this. And so really the only town bucket of money that's available is CPA funds. And so I would urge you to vote yes and hope that town meeting approves this request. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dickerman. Okay, next person.
Ross Donald.
Unmute. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll just go through a couple of my comments here.
Mr. Donald, I
Yes.
know you, I know where you live, but
Oh, yes.
we just ask you to state your name and where you reside.
Yeah, Ross Donald, 25H Chambers Street, and I was born and raised in the town. Knew people that grew up in these units. I'll just try and rip through some of these comments. I'm having some issues regarding open meeting laws and public records laws. I'd like the meetings to be made available to the public. Some of them have not been that way. And I think that's going to be helpful. And I think we might even consider, I have to go to Conservation Commission meetings to get a different version, a different presentation with different information. So I
Okay,
think it would be
Mr.
helpful.
Donald, wait a minute. Here's what we're right now, we are talking about funding FY 2024-01. Okay, so let's focus our attention on what the question of funding that application. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully some of these issues, they've come up in the past, so I don't want to go too far astray, but on density, for instance, a lot of the issues that have been presented in other venues talk about density as being sort of a goal going up to 250 to 300, and the procedure seems to be testing that to see what will be acceptable. In the past, I think some of the one of the numbers was an average goal of 8 units per acre. 15 for the MBTA seems to be a number that's used. The 152 units that exist now on 5 acres are providing a density of 30 units per acre. So I think we're doing pretty good on that score. On the actual design, there's a lot of commentary about that, all of which seems to denigrate the buildings. I didn't like to hear residents calling the cluster housing chicken coops. I think that was unfortunate to call them things like that. I think they're excellent design, progressive architecture, moving to the suburbs. It was in the era of the Pollard School, which was an award-winning design. The actual designs, they're described as, the buildings are described as old. You know, I'm old, you know, so I think a lot of old things can be saved. The condition of the property, you know, if it's, I've heard talk about contamination, if there's a lot of work, oil residue from tanks that were leaking at one point and replaced. As well as things like mold, mildew, asbestos. And it's said that these buildings need to be torn down because of those things. And actually, there's a process in construction where if you have asbestos, for instance, you have to remove this asbestos before you move on to doing whatever you're going to do with it, including tear it down. If there's asbestos or contamination, does not automatically, inevitably, irrevocably lead to a teardown. The energy, it's described as being a poor energy performer. If you have a 4-unit building, the middle 2 units are not losing any heat to the side units. The roof was just done, oh, maybe what, 4 or 5 years ago, adding 6 to 8 inches of foam insulation to what was already there. So it's very well insulated at the top. The middle units are not losing any heat except to the ends, and there's a lot of glass, and that provides light. So, and there are units there that have, because of the solar gain and the insulation, have no mechanical air conditioning. Now that's kind of amazing, but we ought to look at that. If they're performing that way, cooling load is a significant expense. So if it's working in that regard, we might look at it. And when they're described as being small, you know, small, one of the presentations was less than 400 square feet. Well, my unit at Chambers is 18 by 24. That's 432 square feet. Now, we could say that's the fact, but if you characterize it as big or small, it depends on other features, which are mostly design features. For instance, if you say in Chambers Street, it does appear small because of the egress. They're on one side of the wall over here. So that doesn't lend to a feeling of largesse. All the windows are on one wall. They're dark, low ceilings, and so forth. So all of which makes 432 square feet appear small. However, in the cluster housing, which I think as being successful, you have a private front door, a private back door. You have high ceilings, a lot of light. You have good ventilation, cross ventilation. You have overhangs for shade in the summertime, but allows light to get in the winter. You have a tree, a canopy overhead that provides cooling. You actually have a microclimate where you have coolness coming from the wet areas to help create a cooling thing. So this very interesting design. It should be looked at least. And
Mr. Donnell, remember in the beginning, I asked that the comments be limited to 2 to 3 minutes, and you've gone way over that. So why don't you, can you make your final points and we'll go from there?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Okay, next individual, community member.
Oscar Mertz.
Okay, all right. Mr. Mertz?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, we can.
Good, Oscar Mertz from Precinct I, 67 Ryberry Hillway. I am very enthusiastic about this project and support what has been said previously from others about how important and overdue it is. I am constantly surprised by the check on the fact that you cannot spend CPC funds on maintenance. That seems to constantly come up as a challenge because that's been the deferred maintenance has clearly exacerbated where we are today. So I do agree this is very timely and needs to be pursued with speed and with an aggressive approach to the funding as necessary, because it certainly looks like the leverage potential here is going to be quite good. And I would encourage also to go for the higher density and larger project. I think it's important that part of what we're going to do here, and I'm encouraged and will be, as much as I can be a part. If I don't get elected, I certainly will be advocating from the outside on the zoning changes that will be necessary to advance for this project. I think it's clear that what could happen there with some additional density and some nice added units will be great for everyone involved. I'm encouraged that we also keep an eye on the possibility for ownership as well as rental properties here. I would be encouraged, or I will encourage and certainly advocate for trying to come up with ways that we can do some partnerships with some private development to add even more possibilities for greater economic diversity on this NHA land. I think that's where the future lies with additional funding. And certainly that would be interesting to see happen. And so I'm an enthusiastic supporter and urge your committee to continue to help funding this valuable project. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mertz. And just for a point of clarification for our listening public, there's a reference to CPC funds not being used for maintenance. I want you to understand that that's not a discretionary call by our local community preservation committee. That is a statutory restriction, okay? Okay, let's go on to our next community member.
I don't see anyone else with raised hands.
Okay, I'm going to exercise chair's discretion, and I'm going to turn a comment into a question. There were two comments regarding concerns around relocation. And so my question that I'm going to frame, I'm going to keep it narrow so that there's a relocation is we can hear lectures about that. It's a very intricate issue that actually housing authorities are required to address under federal and state regulations. But if we could just have a general statement about relocation services, because it sounds like we have some very nervous elderly individuals And maybe we want to put that out there right now. So maybe Margaret Moran, is she listening in? Margaret, okay, Margaret Moran is with Cambridge Housing Authority, who is the kind of, let's call her the development consultant working with the Needham Housing Authority. And I'm going to ask Margaret if she can just very briefly touch on that, and maybe even point people to some places where they can read about information, just so that people are concerned. I want them to at least have a place where they can start from, and maybe you can direct them. Why don't we turn it over to Margaret for a little brief statement on that, okay?
Certainly. So as you did reference, Chairman, the Housing Authority is bound by state and federal regulations and requirements to provide relocation resources and assistance to any resident that would need to move as part of the redevelopment. It was referenced, we showed kind of two blocks that shows a small project of 32 units and then a larger one. I think whatever we do will only ever impact that smaller number of buildings. Our hope would be then that we would have the relocation resources on site, so that for folks who are in a later phase of construction, they would just move to a unit on site into a brand new unit, so it would be an easier transition. But for the folks who are going to be impacted the most, which would be the folks in that first phase, the Housing Authority will develop a written relocation plan that will specify the rights and responsibilities of the Housing Authority and the residents as it relates to relocation, outline what relocation options each resident has, and we'll do our best to come up with a number of different options, because we know one shoe does not fit all. And then also describe, what kind of assistance they would get. They would work individually with the relocation advisor, who would be meeting with them one-on-one to kind of understand the particular needs of the affected household, and also determining if they would need any assistance in packing. I heard that reference. And if there is individuals who need assistance in packing, the Housing Authority would secure the services of packers who would assist the individuals, and then also secure the services of the moving company to move the residents to their either permanent new home or their temporary home. But there's a lot of individual work done with relocation advisors, working independently with the residents to, again, make certain that we provide good detailed information so everybody knows what their options are, but then also make the move go as smoothly as possible for each individual resident, meeting them where they are.
Okay, thank you. All right, great. All right, so now let's move on. I think that closes out our comments and questions on FY 2024-01. We're going to move on now to FY 2024-02 application. And this was an application to CPC by the Needham Housing Authority regarding the Seabeds Way Cook preservation and restoration program. We have these names may now sound familiar to you. The liaisons are Bob Dermody, Rick Zambone, and actually Laura Dorfman. And one of them will make an introduction. The presenter, again, will be Reg Foster. I also want you to bear in mind that Reg is wearing two hats this evening. And when he is a presenter, he is a representative of the Housing Authority, which is the, and that is a proponent, if you will, of the applicant, okay? He also, as I've mentioned before, is also a member of the CPC. So let's begin by having one of our liaisons make an introductory statement regarding this application, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Foster for a presentation.
Hello, everybody here and online. My name is Laura Dorfman. I'm a member of the CPC. I'm going to give an introduction to FY 2024-02. This request is for $241,052 to be used towards pre-development costs involved in the Seabeds Cook Preservation and Redevelopment Project. These two federally subsidized developments in Needham consist of 46 senior one-bedroom apartments at Seabeds Way and 32 3- and 4-bedroom townhouses for families. These properties are over 40 years old and in dire need of major repairs. The total cost, once completed, of this project is estimated to be close to $40 million. The key objective of the NHA Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative is the redevelopment of the NHA's housing portfolio. This request relates to the repair and preservation of its Seabeds Way and Captain Robert Cook properties. In addition, the NHA is working on the repositioning of these two federal properties from the HUD Section 9 Public Housing Program to the HUD Section 8 Project-Based Voucher Program, which would generate a substantial increase, approximately $919,000 in operating revenue from HUD. This additional revenue will provide key operating subsidy funding to finance the preservation of the Seabeds and Captain Cook properties. The NHA has engaged the architectural firm Dietz and Company to prepare property condition reports for both properties, including detailed findings and estimated direct costs of the major repairs. The total project cost includes direct construction costs, soft costs, financing fees, tenant relocation fees, and other miscellaneous costs required for this type of project. At this point in time, the NHA does not expect to need further CPA funding for this project. Funding sources for this project include a permanent mortgage, a 4% low-income housing tax, credit equity, and an NHA acquisition loan. The CPC has worked with the NHA to obtain details of the project costs, funding sources, and the construction timeline. The expected timeline for the project is to begin in March this month of 2023 and to go through June of 2026.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dorfman. Okay, so representing the applicant is our presenter is Reg Foster. Reg, let's hear from you.
Thanks so much, Peter. I wish I had brought a hat. I could switch back and forth here.
No hats allowed.
So Cecilia's got the presentation up on the screen here. So let's go to the first slide, Cecilia. So you've seen this slide before at the beginning of the previous presentation. We're now talking about projects number 2 and number 3 of the 5 projects that were identified that I spoke to earlier. So let's go to the next slide. And just a little bit of background, where and what are these 2 developments that, again, thank you, Laura, you really described the project well. It's on an 11-acre piece of land that's up in the north part of town, very top corner, just off of Central Avenue before you go under Route 128. And it consists of the 72 units that Laura described. We have a similar but really quite different story to what I reported for Linden and Chambers. These buildings were built in the early 80s. They have suffered from deferred maintenance and underfunding over a 40-year period of time, but they're much newer construction. And there's no need to be even thinking about a tear down with these buildings. What you really need to think about is what's sometimes loosely referred to as a major modernization or a gut renovation. There's a list of issues with those buildings, but they're issues of things just needing to be upgraded and replaced. Move to the next slide, please. So here's some pictures from Captain Cook, existing conditions. The worn out kitchens and bathrooms, site paving needs to be completely done over. There's water damage, the building envelopes. They're better energy efficient construction than Linden and Chambers, but still not do not meet contemporary standards, let alone stretch code standards for that. Siding needs to be updated. Next slide. And there are 4-page detailed Excel lists of every single thing that needs to be repaired or brought up to 21st century standards. Here's some pictures of Seabed Way with some water damage and the same worn out kitchens and bathrooms, paving issues, laundry issues. One of the biggest issues that we hope to correct, and it's going to be very expensive to do that, is elevators. There are 2-story buildings, And the only way to get up to the second floor is up and down the stairs. So it's really does not meet what you try to do in this day and age, called aging in place. And it really causes a lot of churn as we have to move tenants downstairs into a vacant unit when they can no longer manage here. Excuse me for a second. Next slide, please. Sorry. So Laura spoke to the funding. There's a very good news story here. Where is the money coming from? I don't want to get into the weeds tonight, but certainly the CPC has been getting into a lot of detail here. And in some, we've discovered with the good work and analysis by the Cambridge Housing Authority consultants that we can move federal programs from the one that has been currently funding us since the beginning of the 80s, to a new one that provides a lot more annual funding to the tune of what Laura reported, 900,000 plus per year on into the future for the operating subsidy for Seabeds and Cook. And it also it has the potential of freeing up 500,000 plus per year of operating subsidies that is transferable over to Linden and Chambers and to that redevelopment project. That's money that just isn't available from the state, which hasn't really stepped up to the full funding of doing the redevelopment of places like Linden and Chambers Street and the other couple hundred state developments that are all sort of facing the same issues that we are in other towns and cities. Let's go on to the next slide. So this slide, really answers the question, how much are these repairs going to cost? And the bottom line number, again, in great gory detail in these reports Laura referred to, is about $11 million for Captain Robert Cook Drive to take care of everything, $12 million for Seabeds Way. So we're looking at $24 million. These are just construction costs. Next slide, please. Now, what you have to do is put in applications for it's called repositioning to this new federal funding program that's much better. And that takes a few months to do. What we need to do this year is to do a designer, architect, engineering, designer services project to take all of this list of repairs and create the specifications for doing that repairs, and do a bunch of other related things like title reports and environmental reports and so forth and so on, totaling about $1.1 million that's listed out there. So we have to, spend that money this year, but we have very limited capital funds to be able to do that, and they're spoken for and for other urgent priorities. So it's a heavy lift for us to raise the entire 1.1 million. So if you look over in the green box there on the right hand chart, what we have asked for is $241,000 of Needham CPA funding support that will help make up the 1.1 million, and we're going to have to come up with nearly $900,000 ourselves from some other funding source. It could be a loan. There could be reserve funds that used. We think we can do that, but it would really be helpful to have the support from the town of Needham. You may ask, why is it $241,000? Well, that right-hand bottom box that's got a red around it, due to sort of the way the CPA law has been interpreted by DHCD, only about 21% of what we would be spending would be eligible for CPA funds. The other 80% roughly is not eligible for CPA funding support because of the way the regulations and law has been interpreted here. Moving on to the next slide. So what is the bottom line here for this request? Actually, there are two bottom lines. This is bottom line number one. First, this allows us to take our existing, it probably is an overstatement to say obsolete housing, but it will be obsolete in another 10 years or so, and repair and preserve it and bring it up completely up to snuff. And number two, it will help us leverage and get to this increased revenue stream for supporting our ongoing operating and maintenance, so we can keep up with the maintenance of the buildings into the indefinite future. Number three, it preserves these 76 units for upwards of the next 40 years or so, however you want to count it. And there's certainly a huge shortage of both of these types of housing that have been identified in the 2022 housing plan that was just published. All these units, again, will be kept as deeply affordable units, and that's hard to find in this town, in this whole area. And it is also a goal in the Needham housing plan that was just published, and it allows us to as identified. Next slide, please. So bottom line number two, there are two bottom lines here, as I mentioned before. Due to peculiarities of federal law, the annual housing subsidy units used for these 76 units, almost all of them can be repurposed to some new purpose. They kind of go into the Needham Housing Authority bank account and can be then transferred when the time comes over to Linden Street and Chambers Street in that redevelopment. And there is no other place for this kind of thing to come from that's readily available. One of the major reasons that we're going forward with both projects is because this particular project unlocks the value that is hidden in our federally subsidized units, and allows us to not only do the right thing for Seabeds and Cook, but also help do the heavy lift that we have at Linden and Chambers Street, and trying to come up with the funding to make it happen, even the small version of the project. So that's the presentation. And,
Okay, thank you, Reg. All right, so now, thank you again. What we'll do is we'll turn first to the individuals who are here with us in the room and ask if they have any comments or questions. Okay, you can raise your hand. Okay, it's looking like no. Perhaps Mr. Merritt, would you like to?
As a board member, when the Cooksbridge, just after Cooksbridge opened, I tell you that this construction at that time was not up to speed and up to standards, and we ended up suing the developer back in the 80s and did receive some relief. So it is important that they've lasted 40 years. They're in decent shape, but they certainly do need a refurbishment, and that's why we're pursuing this. There is money available through the federal government, not through the federal government, but as part of the financing. But this little bit of seed money here now would be very helpful in rolling a ball.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, any other comments here for individuals in the room? Okay, let's go to our listening public.
The one, Sue?
It's Sue, BSC Zoe. Sue, we all know you. Maybe you can tell us where you live.
Hello, Bob. And hello, Reg. And I do agree with what Steve just said.
Sue, where can you tell us where? Give us a street where you live.
I'm at 46 Seabeds Way, and that was my apartment you guys just saw. And I wish it had been neater. But anyway, I do agree. I remember what Steve was talking about. We've had very poor construction activity on Captain Robert Cook Drive when I was living down there, and I remember them having to sue the company. But however, I'm really hoping that the organization will seriously consider both Linden and Chambers, Seabeds and Cooks. My neighbors on both sides, who've had to put up with a lot. If you contacted the Board of Health, you would find an incredible list of people who have become sick because of the environmental problems that both neighborhoods are having. I think one of our biggest issues here, and it's more of a town thing, it's the lack of access to public transportation. But however, I think that Captain Robert Cook and Seabeds do not need to be torn down. I believe they need to be completely renovated and everything brought up to standard. So I'm hoping you seriously consider it. And like I said, you might want to contact the Board of Health for any more information. So that's all I have to say. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, anyone else from our listening public?
I don't see any other raised hands.
Okay. All right, so that's going to close our discussion on FY 2024-02. And now we're going to move on to the third application for funding, and that is FY 24-03. And this is an application by the Park and Rec Commission for design funding for DeFazio Tot Lot. The liaisons are myself and
rest of the evening.
thank you. Okay. Okay, all right, that's good. I know where to find you.
Sorry
Okay.
about that, Reg. I clicked on the wrong name.
Okay, so the liaisons are myself and Jean McKnight. And making our introductory comments for describing the project is Jean McKnight. Oh,
I'm sorry, I didn't expect that.
okay, that's okay.
But-
It's, all you know what? We're going to do it together right now. Okay, I'm going to start, and if you have, you're really good at correcting me. Okay, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, that's
I
fine.
just didn't realize.
No, that's fine.
It
Okay,
was my
that's
job.
fine. This is a request for design funds for the redesign and rehabilitation of the DeFazio Tot Lot, which is located at the DeFazio Field, right in the front as you approach the fields in the back. What they anticipate is that the funds this year will be for design. Do you recall the amount, Jean?
Yes, $35,000.
Okay, $35,000 for design. And we usually ask for a projected cost, and when we anticipate that the Park and Rec will be back here next year for the cost of the actual installation. And what is that number?
$435,000.
Okay, so with that, we're going to turn it over to Stacy Mulroy, who is our Director of Park and Recreation. And she will be the presenter and describe this request with a little bit more particularity than Jean and I did. Okay, thanks. Stacy, it's for you.
Thank you, Peter and Jean. My name is Stacy Mulroy, and I am the Director of Park and Recreation. Cecilia, am I able to share my screen?
You should be.
All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, so this request is for, like Peter and Jean said, the design funding for an upgrade renovation for the DeFazio playground, the tot lot over at DeFazio Fields. So some of our strategies as far as playgrounds go, because Needham has 18 playgrounds here in town. We had a playground assessment done in 2021 as a guide to identify the playgrounds. And our next step, once identifying which playgrounds need the most renovation or redesign or renovating, because of safety concerns, is to improve general improvements, upgrades. All future playground renovations will include PIP surfacing, which means poured in place. That's the rubberized surfacing that you see at Greens and Sonita. And make sure that we follow other ADA and MAA requirements. We also commit to creating a specific maintenance plan for all of our playgrounds, including high and low frequency inspections, assessments, and audits when necessary. So the average life of a playground is about 15 to 20 years, depending on usage. Like I said before, Needham has 18 separate playgrounds. This DeFazio playground was originally built in the late 60s, early 70s. The first major renovation was in 1992, and over the past 20 years, there have been some upgrades, including the Rainbow House made by the Exchange Club. The current playground as is currently around 26 years old, so well past its prime. So here are some pictures, and Peter and Jean both said that we shouldn't have taken them in the sun because they did a site walk with me, and you can see that just some of the deterioration of the mulch. If you can see my cursor right here where the footings are, the cement is coming up on these different places. Similar here, all this sand here is no longer compliant with playgrounds or ADA, and even, you know, trying to get a stroller down here in the back is very difficult. Just a few more pictures. This is not the actual design that we will be going for. This is just an example of a potential future playground. So we've got some rockers, a full piece, some swings, both toddler and child swings, including an ADA swing, and some sensory spaces right here, including spinners. So the cycle of a playground planning and budget, stage one was the summers where we identify the next playground, and DeFazio was up. Stage two is where we are currently. We started in the fall with submitting for design funding. Stage three would be hopefully getting the funds awarded this spring, and in the summer award a design to a firm. Early fall 2023, this year, we'd be working with designers on the project scope, design, and cost. And then late fall of this year, choosing the final design and using that documentation to apply for construction funds. And as Peter said, we would be coming back to CPC to request funding for that. So once again, on the funding, $35,000, what we're requesting now. Playgrounds come in all shapes and sizes, and depending on what equipment you use and how much of it and how big the footprint is, the rubberized flooring is can be quite expensive. We're estimating that the low end of the budget be $200,000 and the high end be on the 400, bringing us to the $435,000 that Jean mentioned. And that is it for me. I'm going to stop sharing, and then if anybody has any questions.
Okay, so let's start.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
may I add one thing, and it's right in their application. I think one of the design issues will be location. And I think what's meant by that is the playground currently covers a large area. I don't know if Stacy has the number of square feet in her head, but it's intended, as I understand it, that the tot lot area will be consolidated on one part of what looks like the existing playground. And then there's a reference to appropriate plantings going down to the wetland area. So the idea is the designer will determine, you know, with the client, what is the appropriate location and what appropriate plantings might be made outside that location in the rest of the existing property.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes.
Thank you for any of that, Jean.
Thank you, Jean. And off the top of my head, I believe the area of the tot lot is around 15,000 square feet. And we're looking to move it to the top right corner, closest to Asa Field. And use much smaller footprint, but make sure that we're moving around some of the current trees. So it may not be an exact rectangle, but we'll make sure that we keep the shade trees there for the kids.
Okay, let's get, unless there's a point of clarification, is there, the hand is up by Rick Zambone. Is that,
It's clarification, Peter.
Okay, let's have that.
At the meeting last week before the Finance Committee, someone on the Finance Committee mentioned that this was under the jurisdiction of the Select Board, and that's not in fact the case. That part of the investigation was that it's under the jurisdiction of the school department, and the Park and Rec folks, Stacy, got a letter from Dr. Gudikants indicating that he's more than happy to see the tot lot placed here. So just to clarify that, for if there's a Finance Committee member looking in who might have that wrong misconception.
Thank you. Yes, and if the committee would like to see that email, I did get an email from Dr. Gudikants about that.
Okay, why don't you forward that to us? All right, so let's move on to our members of the community and see if we have any comments or questions.
I do not see any raised hands.
Okay, all right, so then we're going to close our discussion, our public hearing with respect to the app.
There's one now.
Okay, let's see, we have one. Okay.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, hi, this is Rachel Krimlesk at 22 Seabeds Way again. I was listening to this presentation. I didn't know it was going to happen. But my comment is that I came to Needham, I don't really know how many years ago, but towards the end of 1994 with two small children. And I never knew about DeFazio Field. And today is the first time I'm seeing that there's actually a playground. So I think in the beginning of this presentation, I heard something about signage. And if that includes putting signage in the center of town or at the town hall. Well, when I first came here, I was working at a company here in the business zone. So maybe the center of town or something would be appropriate. Because I had no clue, and I had two small kids. It would have been great to know that there was a second place besides Greenfield. So I appreciate your allowing me to speak again.
Thank you for that, Rachel.
Why don't we do that? Let's just say that, why don't we put this right now on the record for, I'm going to turn her comment into a question. And that is, where can community members find out information regarding the location of our various playgrounds?
Currently, the best use to find information about our playgrounds is on on the town Park and Rec website. Thank you. Or at needhamprograms.com. Both of those two websites.
Great. Okay.
Additionally, Peter, they are listed in our quarterly brochures. The summer brochure will be coming out fairly soon, and it's also in the spring brochure, also downloadable on our website. But if anybody wants us to mail them a copy, we'd be happy to do so.
Great. Okay. Any other comments from our listening public?
I don't see any other raised hands.
Okay, good. That will close our discussion with respect to FY 2024 applications for funding, as well as warrant articles addressing the issue of finances. All right, now we have one and a half, let's say, or two matters left to discuss. This next matter that's coming up on our agenda is proposed amendments to our CPA plan. And what I'll let the listening public know that first of all, we have a PowerPoint presentation. Let's see if we can put that up there. And I will be the presenter.
Oh, no, hold on.
You're almost there. Good looking PowerPoint. It really is. Okay, this is our public hearing regarding our community preservation plan. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And okay, so here I just want to briefly state to you what the purpose of our CPA plan is. It's done pursuant to the requirements of the Community Preservation Act. The plan itself is available on our website, the Needham Town website. And the plan is intended to be an informational document explaining how the plan, the act itself applies to the town of Needham, and what our community goals and priorities for funding are, what factors for consideration that we apply, subjective factors for consideration that we as a committee apply in reviewing applications and determining whether or not to recommend them for funding for the town meeting, and also the procedures by which the CPA is administered. Next. Plan was first developed in 2005 when Needham, or shortly thereafter, when Needham adopted the Community Preservation Act. And as required under the statute, when you adopt the Community Preservation Act, you're required to come up with a plan, meet with the select board, the finance committee, and boards and committees that are responsible for the open space, recreation, historic preservation, and community housing stakeholders. And those are the four broad categories where we can use CPA funds. The plan itself was amended in 2006 and 2010. And 2014, probably 2014 had the most substantial amendments because the statute itself had been amended, I think, in 2012. So the 2014 plan reflects some amendments to the statute, but it hadn't been touched, if you will, for a number of years. And so this committee took it upon itself to embark on amending the plan and giving a top to bottom review. Can you see the next slide, please? All right. Here was our process. It was really adopted. We followed the process that you would follow under the act in your initial enactment of a plan. We met with representatives of the boards and committees responsible for open space, historic preservation, recreation, and community housing. So a representative of us met with the Conservation Commission, the Historic Commission, Park and Rec Commission, and we offered to meet with the Housing Authority, but they were busy with their redevelopment plan, and we had ready access to the chair, Bang, of course, on a member of the CPC. We also solicited input from other stakeholders. We've met with the Finance Committee. We're having our community members give us information tonight through this public hearing, and we will be meeting with the Select Board on March 28th of 2023. And I want to point out that this was a collective effort. Some towns spend a lot of money hiring a consultant to do the drafting. The drafting and editing was a pretty heavy lift, was done by volunteers on these various boards, including our own, and our staff members who staff and help us on these boards. So it was a collective effort, and we all pitched in. Next slide, please. Here are some of the overall themes of our amended plan. The structure of the plan document itself remains the same. We like the structure. It was a good working document, but it needed updating, refreshing, and it needed an approach the way you look at these sorts of documents in 2020. We gave more detail on the CPA statutory language to ensure that it tracked the language. We provided some additional defined terms tracking the statute as part of the glossary, paying particular attention to some of the terms that we kind of have to noodle through and struggle with in determining eligibility for proposed plans. And we updated data. So we have information regarding the total CPA state distributions that we've received over the 15 plus years that we've been members of or that adopted the CPA, a list of all CPC funded projects. And we also put together data showing the CPC grants by eligible categories. Next application. Next. Further overall themes, we created live links in the plan to allow access to the data that I just referenced and other information, like access to the Community Preservation Coalition, which is an advocacy organization that we are members of, and that advocates for the community preservation and also has a lot of really helpful information in terms of addressing issues of eligibility and other technical issues associated with the Community Preservation Act. We have access, link to the act itself, a link to the Needham CPA bylaw, where you can see how the Needham bylaw applies, a particular section applies to this committee. We have a link. We will have a link now to the recently enacted Needham Housing Plan, members of the committee, and a link to the list of historic properties, which is much more significant list than is indicated in our present plan. We've also spent a lot of time updating the general factors for consideration, the subjective factors that we apply in determining grant requests. We worked on those both in the prior funding cycles and in this funding cycle. And with respect to each of the particular sections, there's a particular section dealing with open space and recreation, a section dealing with community housing, and a section dealing with historic restoration. Each of those sections have their own factors for consideration in determining whether or not we should recommend an appropriation. And those were updated as well. Next slide. All right, let me just quickly hit some of the highlights, and I'll tie them to the page. That we reworked the formation and the CPC committee with formation and responsibilities and the makeup and the duties of the committee, and that's on page 5 of the plan. And I want to note to the public, what we now have on our website is what you can find the 2014 plan, the proposed plan it's dated April 2023, both in clean version, and through some the efforts of our staff and the staff, we have a red line which compares the two. So if you want to just go to the website, and I think it's even posted for the agenda materials for tonight's meeting, you can see the work that we did in a red line format. Page 6 of that. We give a little more detail on CPA funding requirements. We address the issue of how we have our 10% for each of these reach of the reserve funds. The balance of it of 70% is appropriated in the town's discretion, as long as it is appropriated for open space, historic resources, and community housing. We gave a more detailed description of how CPA funds can be used at pages 7 and 8. We, as I mentioned earlier, we did a detailed review and update of under the general review of factors for consideration at pages 9 and 10 of the proposed amended plan. If you go to open space and recreation, you'll see that there's an introduction at page 11. And it's important for folks to read that because it shows that as far as the park and recreation, they're undergoing a review, open space review, and their intent is to complete that review. And I think what we'll see is a proposed update that we're just going to end up inserting into this document probably sometime next year. The most substantial revisions under the particular stakeholders come under community housing. That has been significantly revised, and it's really just a matter of timing because our latest housing plan was recently adopted, and we have one member who was on that committee, Jean McKnight, who is also on our committee, and she took it upon herself to fold in relevant sections of the community housing plan and integrate it into our CPA plan. So there are new sections for community housing resources and needs, priorities, strategies, and factors for consideration. And those can be found at pages 14 and 15 of the new proposed plan. And then with respect to historic preservation at page 16, the section ended up being a little shorter, mostly because they put together a substantial list of historic properties that they haven't, that the committee has, historical committee has an interest in, and that's available through a live link. I think what we also have is available is a CPA procedures document. It's kind of a step 1 through, I think, 4 of what you do if you're an applicant. And what that document was substantially revised, and we must give credit where credit is due, and that was done by Cecilia Simchek. And so thank you, Cecilia, for doing that. That's also available for your review. It's important. That's an important document, especially for applicants who are not town departments, to have available for them so that they know how to come to this committee to make requests for funding and to determine, and it also provides them with information regarding eligibility and time. But that update on that procedures document was part of an ongoing policies and procedures review that this committee has been doing over the last 24 months. And it's resulted in things like we've come up with standardized due diligence questions that we have for each of the particular funding categories, whether it's park and rec or community housing or historic preservation, which we then add to and for each application, and modify it a little bit for each application. But it standardizes our work and makes it easier for us to do, and easier for us to ensure that we get complete information in connection with a review of the application. We've also put together a standardized workflow schedule for the committee to work from. And we've added some other little things about what we'd like to see in terms of results on the application, including a little more detail on grant requests and signage where we get acknowledged for the funding that we provide, and also a request that then the applicant or the entity that receives funds to provide periodic updates to us regarding funding, their expenditures of funds. So with that, I would like to turn it over to many members of the public who are listening. We got your information tonight about what your wants are, I guess, indirectly through your responses to the funding requests tonight. But I want to open it up to the public, and this is your opportunity to express any particular needs and desires for the use of funds, regardless of what the category is. If you have some thoughts, let us know. If you listen to this tape later on and you come up with some ideas, again, you can email us, email Cecilia Simchek at the town of Needham and provide us with that information. And if you have any information to offer to us right now, I'll turn it over. Anyone available? Cecilia.
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. All right. Well, that then closes our public hearing. Jean, we closed the public hearing, Jean? I'm turning to Jean for procedure here. Is that right? We closed the public hearing.
Yep. Well, I know in the planning board, we vote to close the hearing.
Okay, good. I think that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's have a motion.
I move that we close this hearing.
Okay, that's done by Jean McKnight, second by Bob Dermody, and we have to do a roll call vote. We'll start with Rick Zambone.
Aye.
Reg Foster.
Aye.
Laura Dorfman.
Aye.
Bob Dermody.
Aye.
Dave Harrow.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Okay, thanks. And now we're back in our regular notice meeting now. Okay. And we'll turn to our agenda and see. I think that I don't have any additional items for this evening.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just a quick comment on the following. I just noticed on page 1, there's someone whose term expires June 22.
Okay, good. Let's.
It's just on,
winner.
it's on page 20. Cecilia.
Okay, we'll fix that. All right.
Say goodbye.
Yeah. What are you doing here?
Okay, I have no updates at this time. I just want to remind folks that we have another meeting next Wednesday, probably same place. I want to thank everyone, the liaisons for making their presentations, and our presenters who are still around. Thank you very much. And any members of the listening public who are still around, thank you for sticking with us and providing your input.
And for
Okay.
our friends at the Needham Channel.
And also, let's get a shout out to the Needham Channel. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Okay.
What will the focus of our next meeting be?
The focus of our next meeting will be further discussion regarding pending warrant articles, pending applications. Okay. All right. So let's have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. And that was by Bob Dermody and Gene McKnight. We're going to have a roll call vote as required under our open meeting law as modified. Bob Dermody.
Aye.
Gene McKnight.
Aye.
Dave Harris.
Aye.
Rick Zimbo.
Aye.
And Reg Foster.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
And I
Thank you,
vote
Reg.
aye as
Oh,
well.
I'm sorry, Laura. Sorry, I missed you. Okay, Laura Dorfman.
Aye.
She retired in 22.
I guess that's me.
And the chair votes aye. Thanks very much. Okay, Gene, thanks for.